Good job you've come, Gareth. You've got the talking stick all day.
I know. I saw that from the agenda, Mike.
Yeah, this is the Gareth Bradford show. Right, I'll make it 10 o'clock. Are we all ready to go?
Yeah.
Right, any apologies, Dan? Right. Any substitutes? Right. Any declaration of interest? No. Minutes of the last meeting, they've been circulated. I'm happy with them. Any comments or questions? No. Accept that then. Right. Item 5 then, Gareth, you've got the first one of your reports. Yep. Fire away.
Thank you, Mike. Agenda item 5, board, is the Housing and Land COVID-19 Recovery Strategy and Implementation Plan. This was originally commissioned by the board back in April, was reviewed by the board at its last meeting, and is now coming to the board for the final approval today. Again, just to sort of reiterate, and with immense thanks, this has been a process that's genuinely worked in partnership with the local authorities and the private sector. So the local authority working group has been absolutely brilliant in helping us develop and shape this. So thank you to all our local authority officer colleagues who've given their time to help us co-develop this, and also to the private sector, the Commercial Property Forum, the Town Centre Task Force, and other colleagues who've also given their time to help us really define and shape this. It is directly informing the business cases to government that we committed to make, and to the comprehensive spending review as well. I'll pass over to Rob Lamond, who has led the work on this, just to add any additional points, and then happy to open it for conversation. The recommendations are laid out on the first page of the paper. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, all right then.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate Gareth's point, Chair, about the close collaboration we've had with local authorities and other partners throughout this whole process has been really encouraging and really helped the whole process of development of this document. Following on from the board's commission in April, we've worked through a number of forums to develop the document that's on the agenda today. Alongside that, it's also informed and continues to inform our wider asks of government through the Recharge West Midlands document, the comprehensive spending review, and other proposals, ongoing proposals with government. Throughout the whole process, we've received really strong support from our partners and a lot of input, which has been really, really helpful. The plan itself is in 3 sections. Section A, which is the overall strategy, Section B, which is the interventions proposed and the implementation of those, and then Section C, which is an ongoing piece of work to identify specific projects which would support this work and be aligned to this work. Colleague Colin Clinton has been working extremely hard with local authorities to identify key projects and how they would fit into this process in future, and that will continue to be ongoing work as and when we move through this process. So as Gareth has said, we've got the 7 game changes within the document that are listed under section 3.3. They're the kind of key headings or themes throughout this process that we've worked to. And this was agreed in the draft work in progress that was received by the board in July. So the recommendations are at the front of the report, including publication of a public-facing document to help understanding of the process that the region's been going through, and also to gain further support and further momentum for this piece of work. So that's the report in summary, Chair.
Okay. Any comments or questions, please? No? We accept that then? Thank you very much.
Accept it with pleasure, Chair. There's an enormous amount of really good work done here. Thank you.
Yes. Well, as always, it's the work behind the scenes that people don't see. It's how they see the end result. So hopefully we can move forward with that. Okay, moving on then, Gareth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, so this is one that has been personally commissioned by yourself, Mike, as chair of the board, but also by the wider board itself. When we came to the board at the start of this year, we knew that there were some real challenges for our town centres. As we hit lockdown and the COVID-19 impact, part of the COVID-19 recovery work that the board has just signed off was about town centres, town centre living in particular, and the need to really start to promote town centre living. We've prepared this paper as part of that work, and as the board, as the recommendations say, we're asking the board to consider and endorse the principles and the sorts of interventions that are set out in this paper. The goal being that this paper would inform both local authority bids to the future high street funds and the town centre funds being worked up by government, to the comprehensive spending review and the government business cases. Again, just really immense thanks to local authorities who've been part of our town centre working group, who've co-developed this, and also to the town centre task force. I'll ask Pat Willoughby just to take us through some of the points in the paper, Chair, and then welcome it for conversation and discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. I'd just like to add to what Gareth has said. So this paper has been prepared in the context of this being a shared agenda, and therefore it needs shared solutions. So the collaboration that we've had with local authorities and the private sector and others has been fantastic over the last weeks. As with the recovery strategy, the emphasis of this paper is very much upon delivery. It's not about theorising the problems of town centres or the challenges that we face in any detail, but looking at what those are and then focusing on delivery. In terms of the structure of the paper, we do rehearse the challenges. You know them all very well. We've given some statistics in the paper here, but as you're all very much aware, this is changing on a weekly basis, and we're anticipating some further significant changes over the autumn period. So those stats are likely to change, but I think that the challenges and the problems that we face are likely to continue. One thing which I would like to highlight in the paper is the public sector role in the future of town centres. This is very much recognised by the private sector and other organisations, and they're very much looking to the public sector to help them deliver what they want to do. Some of the key areas that they've identified are around land ownership and assembly, the management of assets. That includes land that local authorities own or might wish to take into their ownership to facilitate a development. There are many statutory functions, planning, licensing, environmental health, all of which help to create a better place. We've focused, as you've asked for, in town centre living, so that's thinking about how the housing supply issues relate to encouraging more residential development in town centres, but in a way that supports the retail and mixed use activities that take place there. Making town centres really attractive, vibrant, lively places aren't just about living and working in a place, but they're about healthcare, social and community facilities. And it's about having really good accessible places where businesses are supported and where the taxations and fiscal rules work in a way that supports businesses to do what they want to do. So all of those points are very important to the private sector, and they clearly give the public sector a role in shaping future of town centres. In the document, we've identified 10 principles which shape the overall strategy. This is very much about town centre living, but not just about homes. It's about creating really fantastic places with a wide range of activities, creating town centres where people want to go. They have lots of other options for doing things in other places, but this is about making town centres really great places. There is a long list of interventions. I think this is about, first of all, it's about understanding the assets that we are working with, knowing what's good and what needs to be changed. We talk about projects and investments, and this is one area where WMCA and local authorities can really contribute. to the property market and the land, leading and supporting activity that we want to make happen and which the private sector might want to make happen, but they themselves are facing challenges. So this is about unlocking those opportunities and removing the barriers. Understanding the planning regime and making it proactive, but making it work for us in a way that is sensible and a way of minimising the effects of any unintended consequences of changes to the planning regime. Understanding and having clarity around governance and who does what, extending not just from controls, but also to finding people who will stand up and make their voices heard in town centres and champion the process of change and recovery. And as Gareth said, this is very importantly about the asks of government and helping us to shape what those would be. In terms of those interventions and how the principles might work in terms of next steps, what we're asking for today is feedback on the content of the paper, understanding how this feeds into the recovery process. But fundamentally, this is all about the places. All of our town centres are very different. They have their own character, their own identity. So as we work forward, we're planning to work with local authorities and others on interventions which will directly relate to their town centre, producing toolkits, action plans for each centre, and also taking on board the work of the task force. So that's it, Chairman, in terms of summarising the paper. This is very much about setting out a policy position, but also understanding that a lot of the work is actually in the detail of what gets done where, and organising priorities and phasing and being really clear on what's our role and where we can help others. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Pat. Yes, I asked Gareth to commission this report purely and simply because we all know that our town centres have now changed, I think, immeasurably over the last few months. One thing I would say is we keep saying post-COVID-19. I'd like to say living with COVID, because at the end of the day, it's not going to go away. And as a result, if we wait for it to go away, then this looks like a document that's going to be sitting on the shelf, which of course I know that that's not the case. I think there are a move now, certainly in my town, where we are looking now to put people back into town centres, because if they're in the town centre, they're going to use the facilities that exist in the town centre, which helps them support those businesses. I think retail, as we all know, has taken a change for the worst, in my opinion, that it's now nearly all online, except perhaps some unique opportunities for retail. And some of the larger retail units now are obviously now going into decline, or many of them going bust. So I think that it is a change that we're going to have to live with and evolve. But I think it is important that we engage with the planning departments of each local authority, because it's the planning departments that will stumble and well, in my view, block this happening. There are still the planners, and I have some, that think that, you know, we should have 2 car parking spaces for every apartment, even though they're living next door to a railway station or living next door to a bus terminal. More and more people, not me I would add, are using public transport. And as a result, we need to look at town centre living in a different light. And we've got to convince planners. And I think what we need to do is get this document to each planning department of the combined authority to see what our thinking is. And I think we need to have an input from them. Have Darren? You're on mute, Darren.
I was just not quick enough on the gun there. I mean, you actually came to the point there about, you know, our planning departments. Do we have any sense of how this is impacted by the white paper and the housing number figures? I mean, our view is that are we actually going to need a planning department if it's all going to be zoned and we're not going to have any control over it?
Yeah.
If we want to read this is all about partnership and engagement. And if Walsall Town Centre is zoned for regeneration, then are we taking out the equation, and to what extent can we not, through the WMCA, not be taken out the equation? Because this is great as long as we can actually deliver on it. But if the developers are going to go their own sweet way,
I have to say, it always annoys me, whichever government you get, whatever colour they are, first thing they do is mess around with the planning system and make it more difficult for us to try and engage with that process. And we end up with development, which in actual fact is something we didn't want in the first place. Gareth, you want to comment?
Just to raise one point, which I don't think we mentioned in our overview, but it's quite important and sort of responds to Darren's point partially, is we have set out in the paper we'd look to use the single commissioning framework to try and implement the policy principles. We've got a scheme actually in Councillor Bird's area coming forward through the single commissioning framework at the moment. We've got a scheme in Sandwell as well coming forward through the single commissioning framework, both town centre schemes looking to promote residential living. And I think this paper can help us in terms of driving developer and investor behaviour in and around town centres in the way we use our devolved housing and land funds as well, because we can give clear signals to the market about what sort of scheme is going to be acceptable and are we looking to see within our town and urban centres. On your wider point, Darren, just to reassure, planning authorities are part of the working group that Pat has set up to develop this paper to make sure that all the local planning authority officers are involved and are helping to shape the paper as it comes forward.
Angus?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was wondering if Patricia could just expand a bit on the town centre investment prospectus, as whether that's because I think my feeling is to have a document which is almost like a roadmap or plan to work to for every borough and every town centre, and how that links back to what we've just been talking to within the WMCA. You know, who's responsible for creating that, or is it a joint effort? Because obviously the majority of the input has to be local, because I think we all have views of how we want to expand and regenerate our town centres. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think each town centre will be different. The call upon the land use will also be different. I notice in the report the local development orders, which of course then gives the potential developer a tick box that basically says, yes, you know, if I can comply with all that, then I've got planning permission, which of course is within the white paper. I have to say I view that with some trepidation on a wider scale, but I think it is important that we keep our eyes on that. I think I think the point was made by Darren. We won't need a blooming planning department, to be honest. There'll be a few planning officers redundant, in my view. Ian Courts.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I think the report sets out very well the issues, the problems, and indeed what you know, the possible courses of action are. My concern is, you know, the amount of time that we spend on analysing the problem. I want to see us look, and I've said this several times, what are the suite of interventions that we could do? Now, problems in town centres tend to relate fundamentally to two things. One is ownership, and this is why it's so important that we've linked with our asks on the devolution paper for, you know, the whole CPO problem to be looked at, because these things take too long to get a CPO. That's the first issue, and that's really important in how we design and find solutions for our town. Second is on planning. And it seems to me that planning is a real problem. I mean, frankly, you know, I mean, we've all got loads of good planners, but I think they are guided by evidence. They're guided by rules. Often there's a lack of what I'd say is imagination. You know, the documents say this, therefore we have to do that. And the solution from government is to sweep it all away. And I think there's some real issues. You know, we need better imagination and better visions in terms of doing our town centres, and be given the freedom to do that rather than just remove the planning controls. So, I think that's it, Chairman. I think we're doing a lot of great work, but we really do need to know the suite of interventions, the art of the possible, the art of what we can do, rather than just analysing the problem again.
I think you're right, Ian. I think the biggest issue is absent landlords, for the simple reason that they are happy to, well, I say happy, perhaps the strong word, but they don't seem bothered to leave units empty in town centres. Many of them in Walsall are London-based companies who, just quite honestly, it goes off at the top of their head. They don't seem to bother at all. But there we are. Julie. Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I actually totally agree with the latter points Councillor Courts made about us actually looking at actions moving forwards rather than just strategy papers. But on a slightly different note, Chair, I wondered if there was consideration of the position of non-constituent members and the asks that may be done there. I'm just slightly concerned that there is some duplication of work going on between the CA and the actual unitaries, Mets, boroughs, looking at things, analysing, but actually the proof of the pudding is actually doing the work. I just think we need perhaps to avoid duplication. There's a lot of good work gone on here. Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying, but I do feel districts, boroughs and unitaries are doing some of this work already.
I think one of the biggest issues, of course, as I said earlier, is convincing planners that they should change their mind about how town centres work. And in particular, the call upon parking. I think that really precludes a lot of development going forward, for the simple reason that you need a high concentration within town centres. And as a result, I think if we are to see the high streets change the way they are, then obviously we've got to change the way the planners look at this particular issue. Good morning, Neil. You're next.
Oh, thanks. Morning. Yeah, I just wanted to just be clear on a couple of things that have been mentioned, just for everyone's sort of benefit. So there is this clear distinction between the strategic planning teams that we've all got and the development management teams. The development management teams do apply the rules, but they apply the rules set by our strategic management teams. So that is where we need the creativity in the SPDs and the local area action plans that strategic teams come up with. That's where we need the creativity, and that's where the development management teams will be able to follow those rules. The second thing is, if zoning, one of the biggest problems we have in Walsall is land ownership and site assembly to get developments away. So if zoning could lead to CPO power, rather than having to wait for some other planning application or an outline or a strategic planning document to give us that power, that would be brilliant. That's it.
Okay, Ian Courts.
Can I just pick on something you said, Chairman, about absent landlords?
Yeah.
One of the problems we have with our centres is that we're running out of things that actually will generate a viable business. Now, one of those used to be financial services. Sometimes it is now, sometimes it isn't. But the other one is hot food takeaways. You know, the whole, and frankly, some of those I suspect work under a different regime than other businesses. So, and they aren't necessarily what we always want. So I think the absent landlords, linked to what what Neil just said, in terms of this need to ensure that we can make more decisive action in terms of the ownership, the CPO, and so on, in relation to what uses we think needed in the centre, rather than what absent landlords think.
I think you're right, and I think what we need to do as local authorities, Ian, is enforce our community impact policy. So effectively what we can say, and we do have the power to do this, I'm sorry, we've got enough of those, whatever they are, whether they be takeaways, whether they be licensed premises, whether they be gambling establishments. There comes a time when you have to say, no, enough is enough. because they don't generate the kind of town centre, the mixed economy that we need. I've got Keith Alcock. I can just see his head. Well, matter of fact, I just see his hair. But I think you need to adjust your camera, Keith. Far away.
Thanks, Mike. I'm actually, I can't get on the internet from where I am at the moment, so I'm using my phone. That's probably why.
Right.
A lot of the points I was going to raise have been said by the previous colleagues, especially around CPO, which Sandwell considers to be one of our biggest issues. We're not necessarily concerned with planning because talking to our regen team, they're quite on board for moving forward with this mixed use model. However, one question I'd like to raise is all the money is for capital is for either commercial properties or for housing, where we've got measurable outcomes in terms of number of units or floor space created. But what about revenue funding for maintaining the areas? So, like if we want to do environmental improvements or we want to do cultural events in there to actually get the event moving, is there any ideas on moving forward that to provide funding?
I can't answer that one, so I'll call Gareth next. Gareth?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Can I just use the opportunity as well to say one of the things the paper does try and do is set out those interventions that we're doing around land assembly, for example. We are doing quite a lot of this at the moment, as many members of the board will be aware. We are proactively buying land, acquiring land, and assembling sites within town centres at the moment across the region, and I think that is a really important bit of our interaction and role as the CA is to work with our local authority partners on that land assembly piece. Just coming back to Keith's point, one of our challenges, as you rightly say, Keith, and we've been working very closely with the Sandwell team, is that we have capital investment, for example, to fund the demolition of Ball Street car park. But we don't have the revenue from government at the moment to do some of those wider projects that we'd all like to see supported within town centres to try and drive footfall. So one of the asks within this paper and also in the COVID-19 paper is that we lobby government specifically around that town centre revenue funding point to try and make sure we've got the spread of both capital and revenue funding. And that has been a big part of our conversation with a number of local authority officers, is about how do we best do that to make sure it really adds value. Just on Councillor Lee's point, if I could just address that, Chair, one of the things that we've been absolutely desperate to do is to not duplicate at all. So where local authorities are producing town investment plans, for example, we absolutely would not produce a separate town investment prospectus. This is about aligning and linking in where we can and adding value. So, for example, in Dudley, there is a Dudley town investment plan being produced. We're aligning with the Dudley team. Similarly in Sandwell, similarly in Walsall, similarly in Wolverhampton. It is absolutely not about duplication in any way, shape or form. This is about adding value and making a difference, and frankly helping us all secure more funding for the region from central government to make sure we can really unlock our schemes within town centres. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. I have Councillor Justin Sweetman indicated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, like our previous colleagues, a lot of my questions have been anticipated. But I suppose it brings us, sort of segues quite nicely. Obviously, the paper is thorough. There's some superb ideas and principles. I totally hear that. What I'd like to hear now, and I may have missed this in the paper, or perhaps we need to go into more detail, is how we're going to prioritise these principles and ideas, and whether there are already considerations. What are the criteria that would be used for those priorities, and are there plans for pilot test centres? Thank you, Chair.
Gareth, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good suggestion. One of the things we've been looking at is we've got a list of a lot of interventions there, as Councillor Sweetman says. We can't do them all simultaneously at the same time. We need to prioritise them. But one of the bits of feedback we have had, Councillor Sweetman, is that we need to prioritise in each area differently. because each town is unique. So we did do a bit of a trawl with our local authority officers at trying to prioritise those interventions. One of the things that came out repeatedly was Councillor Courts' point around CPO and land assembly. So I think almost regardless of which local authority you're in, it seems that one of the big areas is fragmented land ownership and land assembly in CPO. So that definitely feels one that's really important. The second one is the point that Councillor Bird was raising earlier on around town centre living and support through the single commissioning framework, for example, for town centre living schemes. But beyond that, do you mind if we take that away, Councillor Sweetman? Because it would be worth doing another trawl on that. But one of the bits of feedback we did have is sort of it will be different in each town depending on the circumstances, and it's quite hard to generalise. But really accept your point that we need to keep just being clear. Are we prioritising our interventions and our impact? It's really good point.
Thank you, Barbara. And a question about a possible pilot area that might be being considered, Chair.
Yeah. So Mike, just on that, we've got a number of towns that are submitting towns fund bids at the moment, so they would be the obvious places for us to make sure we look at implementing this, because we're already involved in shaping those bids, Councillor Sweetman, at the moment. And one of the things the CA is being asked to do is to endorse each of those bids under the government guidance, and also where we can to provide confidence around match funding or other support. So they would be logical places to work with. Can I just raise Julie Jackson's point as well, which is non-constituent authorities are part of our working groups and very actively involved in shaping the town centre work and the town centre interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I have Pat Willoughby indicating. Pat?
Thank you, Councillor Bird. I was just going to reinforce this point that that you've made yourself and that Gareth has said, which is that all of these places are different, and a number of these places already have strategies and programmes in place, from our own town centre programme to future high streets funds to town funds. And the key for us is to identify where the gaps in this process are, but make sure that everything hangs together really well, and that all of the strategies and interventions are linked in a way that responds positively to the overall vision. So yes, very happy to take away a further consideration with officers about priorities for each centre, but it would very much be focus on how we add value to the existing plans and programmes that are taking place already.
Good. Gareth, is that a legacy hand, or is it?
I'm afraid that is a legacy hand. Apologies, Mike.
Better than being an old hand. Okay, well, I welcome this. As Gareth said earlier, I asked him to write this because purely and simply our town centre is changing everywhere we look, and we need to be ahead of our game. And I think when we've got big high street names like M&S, Debenhams and people like that closing stores, then we need to say, how can we engage with the administrators of these particular companies? We could probably buy their real estate quite cheap, but we need to have a plan rather than leave it empty. So I think that's one of the things. With everybody's support, I hope we can send a copy of this report to the policy team, combined authority, so that we can see our thinking being transposed by planners in the decision-making process while we still have that opportunity, because as Darren said earlier, the white paper that's going through looks like that opportunity might be taken away from us pretty quick. So are we happy with that? Okay, lovely. I'm grateful for that. Good report. And next, Gareth, you're on the talking stick again.
Thank you, Mike. So this is the next one of those policy papers around a key topic which we identified, the board identified, which was around public land, and sort of going further than the one public estate agenda that we've seen in the past. This has been a really interesting area of work to talk about with a number of local authority and other public landowners over the last few months. And the outcome is this paper that's coming to the board today with some high level policy principles for the board to endorse, which we would then roll out across many of our different work streams. If Gerdip is here, if Gerdip could just point out some of the key principles within the paper for the board to look to. And again, we're asking that the board to consider the paper and to agree that the work should inform the bid to the comprehensive spending review, where our ability to use public land in a fresh and interesting way, we have been told, will land well in central government. So Gerda, if you could just take the board through any key points within your paper.
Yes, thanks, Chair Gareth. So this is an initial paper to consider the role of public land and how it can be used